We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 25th of April 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, the funeral of His Holiness the Pope takes place tomorrow. We'll join a journalist who knew him to find out what to expect. Then,
we're here for one simple reason, and that is because the world has changed.
And what does that mean for the future of European and British defence? Well, Prime Minister Keir Starmer met with the EU's Ursula von der Leyen to discuss this and to prepare the ground for more talks, which could have a profound influence on UK-EU relations. Also on the show,
we started with the idea of bringing multiple stakeholders together, and we end up doubling the number of the people and the domains and the areas.
We'll hear about a new urbanism festival in Romania that reimagines the future of cities. We'll have a look through the front pages, and Andrew Muller will take a wry glance back at the week. Our editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck, will join us from Jakarta to look back at a huge 7 days for Monocle. That's all ahead, here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. China, Russia and Iran jointly met with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, yesterday to discuss Iran's nuclear program. Pakistan has closed its airspace for Indian airlines and rejected New Delhi's suspension of a critical water-sharing treaty on Thursday in retaliation for India's response to a deadly Islamist militant attack on tourists in Indian Kashmir. And Republicans in the US Congress plan to introduce a sweeping $150 billion defense package that will give an initial $27 billion boost to the controversial Golden Dome missile defense shield. Do stay tuned to Monocle throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, this Saturday, tens of thousands will gather in St. Peter's Square for the funeral of Pope Francis, a global event that marks the end of a profoundly influential papacy. With mourners arriving from all corners of the world and leaders from more than a dozen countries expected to attend, it's a moment not only of solemnity but of reflection on a pontificate that was often surprising, deeply human and unmistakably political. Well, I'm joined now by Christopher White, Vatican correspondent at the National Catholic Reporter, who met Pope Francis during his time in Rome. Christopher, many thanks for joining us. St. Peter's Basilica has been open almost continuously since Wednesday for the public to pay their respects. What's the atmosphere been like in Rome over the past few days?
Good to be with you, Georgina. It's a strange atmosphere. On one hand, it's quite somber. You see people praying and at times sobbing. On the other hand, it's celebratory. Yesterday, I was walking past the queue and I saw two different groups of Argentines who didn't know each other, but they saw each other by, their country's flags, and they ran up to embrace each other, and it was a joyful encounter. So you get a range of a mix of emotions, and it's very human.
So the Pope's coffin will be sealed today. How significant is that part of the ritual, both symbolically and spiritually?
Well, it will be a somber occasion. I mean, this is a pope that, whatever you thought of him, he exuded life that was undeniable. And when the coffin is sealed for the final time, I think it will be a reminder that it's the end of an era.
What can we expect on Saturday? What will the ceremony look like, and just how large a crowd is anticipated?
Well, the Vatican is expecting at least over 100,000 people. That's plenty more than that can fit in St. Peter's Square. So I can imagine that the Via della Conciliazione, that long, iconic road that leads to the Vatican, will be completely full as well. They've set up large jumbotrons for viewers to watch the event in case you can't get a view of it yourself directly. Some 50 states are expected to be here, including Keir Starmer, President Donald Trump, President Zelensky. So it will be a high-level security event. But the funeral itself, I think, will be rather simple. I mean, Pope Francis carefully modified the funeral rites before his death because he said he wanted his funeral to reflect that of a humble leader, not some grandiose individual.
You just mentioned some of the leaders that are going to be there. I mean, that's a huge spread of a geopolitical presence. Why such a diverse mix of leaders? And why are they all choosing to be there?
Well, despite complicated relationships with many of these figures, Pope Francis enjoyed a reputation as someone who always had a time for people and willing to extend a listening ear. That's why folks from Vladimir Putin to Zelensky have over the course of their reigns come to the Vatican to talk to the Pope. His general disposition was, what can we do together? Where can we find common ground? So that's why you have such unlikely figures like Donald Trump and Zelensky that will be here. I mean, and that's always been the case with the Vatican. I think back to 2005 at the funeral of John Paul II, where Tony Blair ended up being basically seated very close to Mugabe. It's a strange environment, but that's sort of the role the Vatican sees itself, almost a crossroads.
I mean, is there some kind of protocol surrounding the funeral of a pope where politics shouldn't be discussed, for instance, with Trump and Zelensky both there?
Well, to be frank, there really isn't a venue for it. I mean, these individuals are brought in at various occasions, to take their seat, and then the Mass begins. So it's not as if it provides a forum for politics. And I think the Vatican likes it just like that. They are there to pay their respects, not to necessarily engage one another.
Now, the Pope had a brief encounter with the US Vice President, J.D. Vance, the day before he died. Vance's visit gained a great deal of very bad press. Do we know the tone of that meeting, which came against this backdrop of scratchy relations between the Vatican and Washington?
Yeah, we didn't get a readout of that encounter. I'm told by everyone it was very, very brief. From the few footage clips that were released, we saw a very sick Pope meeting what seemed to be an intimidated vice president. He approached him, it seemed to be with some humility. I looked at the images and I thought this is the image of perhaps a son or with a father or grandfather. It didn't seem to be substantive on any level.
So what do we know about the conclave, the process to choose the new pope? When does it begin? How quickly might we see a new pope elected? And who votes?
Well, the conclave, of course, is the most secretive election process on earth. Of course, it's gained notoriety by the recent Hollywood film. But what will happen after this funeral is that the College of Cardinals, this elite body of men from the Catholic Church, will be gathering here in Rome for closed-door meetings for really all of next week. They will be discussing the needs of the Church and what they would like to see in the next Pope. I think they'll have some frank discussions about what they thought Francis did well and what they think the next Pope should improve upon. They will have these meetings, and then at some point they will vote on when they enter into conclave. I think most people would say it's unlikely for a conclave to begin before May 6th, but it could perhaps begin on May 5th. But this is really a time for them to audition one another. These are men that do not know one another. There are 135 eligible cardinal electors, meaning under the age of 80, that can enter into the Sistine Chapel for a conclave. And they come from all corners of the globe, and they haven't spent a lot of time together. And so they're going to have these formal meetings. The coffee breaks will be very important, but so will the dinners in the evening. And it'll be a chance for them to sort of kick the tires a bit and say, could I see this particular person leading the Catholic Church? Once they enter into conclave, that process will take, I imagine, at most 3 days. The last two popes have been elected in just 5 or 6 ballots over the course of 2 days. But there is talk of perhaps a longer conclave just because there is no real leading candidate per se, and it's going to take some time for these individuals to really get to know one another.
You met Pope Francis during your time in Rome. I wonder how you remember him.
Yeah, I've had the privilege of traveling around the globe with him, and I've encountered and met him scores of times over the years. I find him to be, an authentic leader. He is exactly what he presents to be, a complicated, flawed, humorous, determined, stubborn man who was quick to share a joke. He had a very penetrating memory that, as he aged, his body may have failed him, but his memory did not. He would recall things that I said to him on trips, months, years prior. I found him to be someone who was very much at ease and free in who he was, and I found that, at least as a journalist, easy to cover someone who, despite his flaws and whatever you may have thought of his politics, his theology, was pretty confident in what he was trying to do.
Now, given the renewed interest in the films Conclave and the two popes since the Pope died, do you know if he ever watched either film?
He did not. Francis was quite modern in many respects, but on television and film, he made a vow decades ago not to really watch either. And so despite the fact that his speeches were often peppered with literary references, he did not watch film or television.
Before we go, there's one detail from the past week that stands out. His doctor shared that the Pope's final regret was not washing the feet of prisoners he visited in April. What does that say about the man he was, right to the end?
Well, I think it shows you his priorities. This was a man who, at his heart, was a pastor. The very first, thing that he did that really caused a ruckus in the press in 2013 when he was elected Pope was to go to a prison on Holy Thursday during, Holy Week, the holiest week of the year for Catholics, and wash the feet of prisoners, but not just the male prisoners, female prisoners and Muslim prisoners. That created a ruckus, but it showed, I think, to the world his priorities that carried through his 12 years of his papacy.
Christopher, thank you very much indeed. That's Christopher White talking to us from the Vatican. This is The Globalist. Continue now with today's newspapers, and joining me in the studio is Simon Brooke, who's a journalist and a communications consultant. Simon, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Let's start with the Times and this big piece about why Ukraine would rather fight on than give Crimea to Russia.
Yeah, there's so much moving on Ukraine, Russia and the US at the moment. Huge amount of coverage, as you can imagine, in the world's media. But yeah, the Times has this useful analysis. It points out that according to Donald Trump, Kyiv should basically recognise the realities on the ground and accept the Kremlin's land grab, specifically Crimea. But for Ukraine, the paper points out, this is not only unrealistic, but it's a real threat to the whole existence of the country. And the paper reminds us that the White House peace proposal, which has not yet been published, but a draft copy has been seen by Axios, an American media outlet, and that shows that the deal would involve Washington formally recognising Russian control over over Crimea. But of course, the Ukrainians are pointing out that if Russia can have Crimea, then why not wait and then take the rest of Ukraine? Yeah. So there's a moral as well as a sort of there's a practical as well as a moral element here. According to Vladimir Fesenko, who's quoted in this Times piece, and he's a political analyst who's seen as close to the Zelensky administration, Ukraine's more likely to be prepared for the US to pull out of these talks than it is for Ukraine to recognise Crimea as Russian. According to Fesenko, for Ukraine, this is the lesser of two evils. So a really difficult situation here. But as I say, that mix of the morality, if you like, giving in to Russia, but also the practical considerations.
And of course, there was this terrible attack by Russia on Kyiv just the other day. And Donald Trump did appear to react in a way that we might expect, saying, just stop, Vladimir. I mean, this has got to stop. It wouldn't appear to have any effect on how he feels about his peace process, though.
No, it doesn't. I think, look, when I saw that, I just wondered whether one of his advisors had said, we do need to sound a little bit more humanitarian. We need to sound a little bit more concerned about, when you see these pictures, this appalling attack, as you say, on the bus and other attacks we've seen on civilians. But that, as you say, doesn't seem to affect at all what Trump believes in terms of the peace process. So Trump said on Truth Social recently, according to the Times, if Zelensky wants Crimea, why didn't they fight for it 11 years ago when it was handed over to Russia without a shot being fired? And I think there's a logic to that in a way, but let's face it, one of the main reasons for that was the rest of the Europeans let him get away with it. Putin was allowed to do this, which is one of the reasons why we're in this this situation at the moment. And also the Times points out that even if Ukraine wanted to hand over Crimea to Russia, there'd be significant legal obstacles. It would mean a change to the Ukrainian constitution, according to which Crimea is an inseparable part of Ukraine. So this doesn't look likely. It does look as if the Crimea issue is going to be the sticking point in any peace talks.
I mean, the US says unless they can come to an agreement, the US will just pull out. They're just going to walk away. What does that mean? I mean, that presumably then Ukraine loses US funding.
Well, that's the big problem, isn't it? I think, according to this piece, and certainly the mood music that's coming out of Kyiv, is that so be it. If the Americans, rather not have the Americans involved than have them involved, but Ukraine having to swallow a really unappealing peace deal. But certainly the money, the resources is going to be really difficult for Ukraine. Of course, that also puts greater emphasis on Europe then to step into the breach.
And of course, we know that there have been various defence talks going on, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Now, let's have a look here. There's a big piece in the FT. The right must fight before it can unite. And this is about the Conservative Party here in Britain and Reform led by Nigel Farage.
Yeah, so here in the UK, we have these two main political parties of the right, as you say, the Conservatives and Reform, and I think we're seeing this across so many other parts of the world, aren't we, with the sort of the mainstream right and then the more populist extreme right. Yeah, Robert Shrimsley, who is the Financial Times' UK chief political commentator, points out that the Reform Party is the UK's equivalent of MAGA, basically, and it does look as if Reform will do very well in next month's local elections here in the UK. He reminds us that the opinion polls are showing that a combined Tory and Reform vote share, that i.e. parties of the right, is something in the mid-40s, which is around double the Labour Party current standing. That's the current government here in the UK. But the concern is amongst those on the right that Labour could somehow split that vote and come in through the middle. But Shrimsley points out that actually calls for a Conservative Reform alliance are really only coming from the Tories because they're so far behind in the polls. And he points out that Nigel Farage, who the leader of the Reform Party, is setting the political agenda for both main parties, tapping into intense voter disillusion in the belief that he can build a new anti-Labour force. Again, a pattern that's being repeated around the world. But on the other hand, Reform, Nigel Farage knows that if he did throw his lot in with the Tories, it would still make him the junior partner. And the other problem, I think, and this is something that is significant here in the UK, but also, as we're seeing played out again in the US, across Europe, the Reform is socially conservative and anti-immigration, but its populist politics are very much veering towards the left. And this also puts the Conservatives in a really difficult situation. Do they try to appeal to the cosmopolitan, liberal, globalist voters that they have before, or do they go after the socially conservative suburban voters who coalesced around Brexit? So certainly both groups to the right of the political spectrum, but very different views. So the question is, how do the Tories navigate that very tricky terrain?
And can they bounce back?
The Tories, I don't think they can yet, because they haven't really been through that process of purging themselves, if you like, and just still, 6 months or 9 months after the election in which they were absolutely trounced, they still haven't said, look, we're sorry, we know you, the electors, are angry with us, we messed up, we apologise, this is what we're going to do to make things better, and this is how we can offer policies that sound realistic and that really affect ordinary voters. And the fact they haven't done that yet, I think, really indicates why the Tories are languishing so badly behind a Labour government, which certainly isn't popular in itself.
Let's turn to the Washington Post now, which asks about 100 days into the Trump presidency if things are falling apart for him. Now, one of the things that I found really interesting about this piece is that, of course, we know the Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, and we also know that he pulled a negative opinion piece about Trump a little while ago, and yet this has come out. Is this the final sign that actually his rich backers, his business backers, are pulling away from him?
It's a good question, isn't it? Yes. Certainly the Washington Post has always been very anti-Trump, and I think there's an assumption with Bezos that he thinks he can get away with allowing them to do that. But you're absolutely right. A lot of media coverage over the last few weeks that many business backers are really fed up with Trump. Interesting to see people like Jamie Dimon, people who were against Trump and then supported him when he was obviously re-elected, and now are giving signals that they're really not happy, not just with the economic policy, but they always say business needs certainty, and the fact there's so little certainty with this, as we knew there would be with this second Trump administration, I think that's affecting them. So the Washington Post quotes multiple polls this week which shows Donald Trump hitting new lows. His approval rating has been double digits underwater in surveys from the Pew Business Research, The Economist, Reuters, and now Fox News. And the WashPo gloats that Trump was already more unpopular at this point in his presidency than any other modern president not named Trump. He's now flirting with falling below where he was at this point in his first term. But I just thought, when I read that, I thought, yeah, that was his first term. This is his second term. He got re-elected. So I think the question here is that however unpopular the Trump administration might be in the polls, the question is, can the Democrats really capitalise on this disillusionment and convince the voters that they've got a better alternative, and they've got a long way to go on that. And
it's not just tariffs, it's not just the effect on the economy.
It's almost everything that he's unpopular on.
And immigration is a big thing. We're seeing the courts turn against him. This article has a very good analysis, doesn't it, of where it's going wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And as you say, the courts obviously a huge obstacle, just adding sand to the wheels of the administration, if you like, slowing things down, making things very difficult. But it's the polling quoted here in the Washington Post shows that even on issues that should be good for Trump, like deportations, like immigration, like law and order, he's falling behind. Especially tariffs are particularly unpopular, and I think we haven't yet even seen how those are going to translate into increased prices in the shops and the growing cost of just putting food on the table.
Absolutely. Well, one thing that will definitely increase, which is somewhat of a British institution, but if you want to eat in America, a chocolate hobnob is going to cost you more money. But now, thanks to The Guardian, we know the correct way to eat them. And apparently we've been doing it all wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. When I said food on the table there, I thought, that's interesting. What a brilliant segue that I inadvertently introduced there. So, yeah, exactly. So I ought to stress that this is very much a British thing for our non-UK listeners. They might be wondering what we're talking about. But this is this digestive biscuit, which is, it's a very plain biscuit produced by a company called McVitie's, but it's got chocolate on one side. Now, everybody eats one of these biscuits chocolate side up. It's just logical, it's obvious. But according to Anthony Coulson, who's the general manager of the McVitie's factory in Stockport, Greater Manchester in the north of the UK, he insists that the chocolate should be on the bottom and the biscuit on the top. One of the first things I learned when I got to McVitie's was the chocolate side down is the way to eat the digestive. Up until then, I'd always eaten it the other way around. Well, we all had, mate. But the idea is that the tongue gets the chocolate hit straight away. It starts to melt. You start to get the flavour, and away you go. It makes sense, right? I think it does, really. And I was also thinking, what other foods would we eat? Like a pizza? Would you eat that upside down?
Absolutely not. I mean, there's no
Your tongue gets the flavour first and then the bready bit on top.
Yeah, but then the topping falls off, doesn't it?
That's true. And then you'd have to sort of scoop it up, wouldn't you, sort of thing? So I'm not quite sure.
But also, don't you always have to eat a hobnob like dipped in tea?
Well, this is the other thing in terms of dunking, exactly. So when you get to the whole thing of dunking it into your tea, then that whole argument falls apart, as the biscuit very often does as well, doesn't it? So I think this is only for dry biscuit eaters who aren't dunkers, perhaps. What I also like about this piece, the last line is, I still do eat it chocolate side up, if I'm totally honest, says Mr. Coulson. You think, oh, for goodness sake, mate, you know, what hypocrisy, outrageous.
Thank you very much there to Simon Brooke. And lots and lots coming up on the show ahead. We'll be hearing from Andrew Tuck, who'll be telling us about a really momentous week in the life of Monocle.
Craft is its own reward, which is why at UBS we're honoured to work alongside over 50 of today's leading Nobel laureates, each an expert in the art of economic science, bringing you engaging discussions, actionable insights, and inspired solutions, all focused around the questions that shape our world today. For a better outlook, find a Nobel perspective. UBS. Banking is our craft.
It's 8:26 in Brussels, 7:26 here in London. After years of strained relations post-Brexit, the UK and the EU appear to be inching closer, and not just diplomatically, but militarily. With defence cooperation back on the table, officials on both sides are reportedly confident that a formal agreement could be signed as early as next month. But with broader negotiations looming over energy, food standards and youth mobility, is this just the start of something more ambitious? Well, I'm joined now by Ian Bond, who's Deputy Director of the Centre for European Reform. Ian, welcome to Monocle and The Globalist. Ursula von der Leyen and Keir Starmer met yesterday. What came out of that meeting?
Well, good mood music. No concrete agreements, but I don't think any were expected. But they do seem to be making progress on a range of issues, and there will be a formal EU-UK summit on the 19th of May. So that may be the place where they actually announce that they've reached agreement on some of these issues, and particularly, I would say, on security and defence partnership, and maybe also on something on youth mobility.
So what might a UK-EU defence agreement actually look like?
Well, it's not. I think it's being overinterpreted in the press in some ways. It doesn't automatically give British defence firms access to the funding that the EU is now making available for defence projects, which could be worth up to 150 billion euros. What it does is enable them to negotiate to be part of consortiums involving EU firms that are able to tap into this funding. But they themselves would not benefit from the funding. What they would benefit from is the ability to take part in the consortiums.
Right.
So they would still have to find the finance to be involved, but they would be obviously getting some of the profits from the sale of the weapons systems at the end of it. But they would not be in the same position as EU member states.
Right, but I wonder if the defence discussions could actually change the way that Britain responds to threats on Europe's borders.
We're a long way away from that at the moment. I think there are some areas where you could see more cooperation, for example, in protecting critical national infrastructure, including subsea infrastructure. Perhaps more on communications links, on technical kinds of cooperation, participation in research projects and the like. For the moment, the territorial defence of Europe is still going to depend on NATO, although obviously, there are question marks over the US commitment to Europe, and that may rather undermine the effectiveness of NATO if the Americans decide that they are going to reduce or take out altogether their forces from Europe.
And beyond military cooperation, officials are already signalling, as you mentioned, that this could open the door to talks on energy, on food, fish, youth mobility and so on. I wonder if it's fair to say this could quietly reshape the post-Brexit relationship. Is it indeed, as some are calling it, Brexit reversal by stealth?
No, it isn't. I wish it were, but there was an article yesterday by Nick Thomas-Symonds, who's the Cabinet Office Minister responsible for relations with Europe, and he made very clear that the government is determined to stick to its famous red lines of no return to the single market, no return to the customs union, and no return to freedom of movement. And as long as you have got those three no's in place, then you are not by any means reversing Brexit or damage Brexit.
Ian, thank you very much indeed. That's Ian Bond there, Deputy Director at the Centre for European Reform. Now, here's what else we're covering today. China, Russia and Iran jointly met with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, yesterday to discuss Iran's nuclear program, according to the Chinese state news agency. The meeting focused on the IAEA's role in the political and diplomatic settlement process of the Iranian nuclear program, with China expressing support for Iran's dialogue with all parties, including the US. Pakistan closed its airspace for Indian airlines and rejected New Delhi's suspension of a critical water-sharing treaty on Thursday in retaliation for India's response to a deadly Islamist militant attack on tourists in Indian Kashmir. The tit-for-tat announcements has taken relations between the nuclear-armed neighbours who fought 3 wars to the lowest level in years. And Republicans in the US Congress plan to introduce a sweeping $150 billion defense package that will give an initial $27 billion boost to the controversial Golden Dome missile defense shield. The bill aims to supercharge spending on warships and missiles and also seeks to strengthen US military presence in the Indo-Pacific. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now to Bucharest, where this weekend the Romanian capital plays host to a new urbanism event, aptly called New Urban Habits. It's the country's first festival focused on the future of cities. Monocle's resident Romanian and senior producer Laura Kramer caught up with the organisers to find out more.
In recent years, Bucharest has seen a boom in tourism and rapid growth. But with that expansion comes a set of challenges, from increased traffic congestion to underutilized public spaces and neglected historic buildings. Local urbanists have been calling for fresh ideas to rethink the city's development. In recent years, Bucharest has seen a boom in tourism and rapid growth. But with that expansion comes a set of challenges, from increased traffic congestion to underutilized public spaces and neglected historic buildings. Local urbanists have been calling for fresh ideas to rethink the city's development. This weekend's New Urban Habits Festival aims to facilitate that discussion. The event is organized by Urbanize Hub, a locally based collective working to make cities smarter and more livable places.
Everything started with the say-do gap.
That's education expert and human capital strategist Oana Onciu, the project manager of New Urban Habits.
We noticed that everywhere people meet and wear suits and talk about climate change or about building better lives and better cities, but we end up doing a really small percent. And we wanted to address this, even if it's on an experimental way. So New Urban Habits is a big experiment.
Over 2 days, architects, planners, and sustainability experts will gather for public talks and workshops to offer practical solutions for how cities can work better, and even some comedy.
I'm Sami Stancu. I'm the head of urbanism division of Urbanize Hub. It's divided by two, the festival. We have the street that we close under the bigger program of the municipality that is called Open Streets. And also we have a private terrain that will be like a garden. It's a cozy speaking corner. We have international speakers, also national entities that are going to present there. And it will be a very complex program, educationally speaking, but also artistically, because we also have two acoustic concerts after 6 p.m., DJ sets, and also stand-up comedy. So it's going to be a lot.
The festival has also set an example of collaboration across sectors, bringing together a range of local and international partners. Oana Onciu again.
We started with the idea of bringing multiple stakeholders together, and we end up doubling the number of the people and the domains and the areas.
And with such an impressive list of international partners and stakeholders who are coming, I wondered if there are maybe some takeaways that you think Romanian leaders can adapt from their international counterparts that have really stood out to you.
We have Maria Vasilacu with us, which was the vice mayor of Vienna for 10 years. She implemented things that people from administration, from Romania, for example, can live home with, because there are politics and solutions that were implemented and they already passed the test of time.
Politics is on everyone's mind in Romania. The country is preparing for a presidential election rerun in May, a pivotal moment for its democracy amid allegations of Russian interference in the previous attempt. Here is Bucharest-based journalist Alison Mutler.
Romanians will choose whether they stay on in the European Union and NATO camp, or whether they decide to pursue a more isolationist and independent position. In urban areas, most people would prefer to stay in the European camp.
Diana Dobrin, Sustainable Innovation Lead at Urbanize Hub, says voters are increasingly focused on urban issues like pollution. She tells me sustainability in cities will be a key theme at the New Urban Heights Festival.
The objectives that have been set at an European level on the climate transition are starting to become a reality as well in Romania. And for us, this has been quite an important thing to have all of these topics discussed in the festival in a way that is very approachable and friendly and accessible, and encouraging people to actually be part of the conversation. Within the program itself, mobility, and I guess micromobility more specifically, is a bit of a focus. So because a lot of the times these topics tend to be politicized and tend to be used at more of like a superficial level rather than something that people can actually find relevant and can relate to in their daily lives.
With a full program ready to roll out this weekend, Diana says the team is already looking ahead to the next edition and how the ideas sparked here can inspire what comes next.
For us, this festival is a way to then be able to kickstart other projects, to reach out to maybe audiences and people that have otherwise probably not have heard of us or like what it means to look at like participatory urbanism. But the main focus is also to then go into projects and actual tangible work that we can continue working on in the future.
Thanks to our senior producer Laura Kramer for that report. You're with Monocle Radio. Now, as it's Friday, it's time for Andrew Muller's weekly news roundup.
Say my name, say my name. We learned this week that nominative determinism is just not a thing.
I can't wait to see where this goes.
Okay. Tell me more.
Let's see where this goes.
Since you asked, nominative determinism is the idea that a person's name is to some extent their destiny, that what a person is called kind of dictates who and what that person becomes, perhaps even to the extent of guiding their future career direction. Interestingly, the concept was first described by Norman ative determinism.
That's not my name. That's not my name. That's not my name. That's not my name.
We learned, however, that nominative determinism is hooey, bunkum, and indeed balderdash, and we learned this, if little else, when we learned of the existence of this modern American conservative philosopher.
You know, the hardest person to be right now in America is white males, right?
Is it, though?
Let's go back to just seeing each other the way the founders decided we should see each other, as equal.
The same founders, presumably, who specified in the original text of the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution that enslaved black people counted for the purposes of allocating each state's congressional representation and tax bill as just 3/5 of any other citizen. We learned, not for the first time and not in the first country, that those who most loudly declare themselves patriots tend to possess the least actual knowledge of the country whose virtues they are noisily extolling, a proposition with which I am sure the General Muttered Agreement crew will concur. Anyway, we learned that this sage was the president and founder of Christians Engaged, whose general proclivities may be gleaned from their name, and good luck to them. But to return to our setup about nominative determinism, which, to be honest, is starting to feel a bit laboured, but we've come this far, we learned that her given name has turned out to be very much not congruent with a career as a hectoring evangelist, indeed arguably quite the opposite, being, as it genuinely actually is, Bunny Pounds. It's Bunny with an I as well. Anyway, elsewhere amid the ongoing efforts to make America great again, we learned that if anything will atone for a 7% slide in stock markets occasioned by a pointless trade war waged at least in part against blameless penguins, it is apparently flagpoles.
We're putting up a beautiful, almost 100-foot tall American flag on this side and another one on the other side, 2 flags, top of the line, and they've needed flagpoles for 200 years. It was something I've often said, you know, they don't have a flagpole per se.
Yes. Come on, let's have a sound effect of flags flapping as if from 100-foot poles planted either side of the White House. We learned, therefore, that US President Donald Trump has lived in the White House slightly more than 4 years, or slightly more than 4 weeks if you discount the golf excursions, without noticing that the building has what appears to the admittedly inexpert eye like a perfectly serviceable flagpole right on top of it already, but we learned that President Trump proposes to pay for the 2 further flagpoles out of his own pocket. Aww. And when has Donald Trump ever said he was going to pay for something and then didn't? Answer us that.
And on the subject of Trump yesterday, USA Today published an exclusive investigation that they say shows that various Trump organizations have a history of not paying small businesses and individuals in full for their services.
We learned, therefore, that whichever DC area flagpole installers intend to bid for the gig should probably ask for cash up front. But we learned that this was not the only vital public works being undertaken by Trump's administration. We learned of the latest important advance in the crusade of US Secretary of Defense as of this recording, Pete Hegseth, to strip the US military of its modern, effete, wokest, tiptoeing through the tulips tendencies.
No more pronouns, no more excuses, no more quotas, no more woke bullshit.
and return it to being the kind of skull-crushing, blood-drinking death machine of which General George S. Patton himself would have been proud.
Now, there's a green room adjacent to the press briefing room that used to have a table in the middle with some chairs around it where officials would study their notes before they would go out and brief reporters. So what Secretary Hegseth did was he asked for it to be modified into more of a makeup studio.
However, we learned, and greatly to our regret, as Hegseth is pretty much writing these for us at this point, that he might be well advised to make the most of his taxpayer-funded foundation blusher and eyeshadow while he can, as we learned that Hegseth may have delighted us long enough.
We are following a developing story out of the White House where, according to NPR, the White House has now begun the process of looking for a new Secretary of Defense.
At which point it feels necessary to insert the familiar disclaimer that this is all more or less current as of this recording. If Hegseth has, by the time you hear this, been sacked and replaced by Hulk Hogan, Kid Rock, Bunny Pounds, a 100-foot flagpole, a heron, or who or whatever, we hope you appreciate that we do our best to keep up. Your support means a great deal in these trying times. We learned that vultures had commenced hovering after it turned out that Secretary Hegseth had copied in another bunch of non-essential personnel, among them his wife and brother, on the details of imminent military operations. But we learned that in keeping with the warrior ethos he is determined to inculcate, he was striking a defiant and above all sober tone in laying down a firm and above all sober line on what compromises he is simply not prepared to make.
And get along to go along. And, start doing Meet the Press and going to the Council on Foreign Relations and spending time with all the new cocktail sipping crowd. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because President Trump asked me to bring warfighting back to the Pentagon every single day. That is our focus.
Our lawyers inform us that we are permitted to describe his demeanour as energetic, vigorous, and if we fancy pushing our luck, animated. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Muller.
Thank you, Andrew. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
With UBS, you have a truly global partner, incorporating new technologies, innovative approaches, and unexpected opportunities, leading you to insights that help answer the questions that matter, delivered with passion, care, and unmatched expertise. Because it's about rising with the dawn each day, knowing that we can do even better. That's what banking is to us. Not just work, but a craft. UBS. Banking is our craft.
It's been a big week for Monocle. We held our Chiefs Conference in Jakarta, our new website launched, and the May issue of the magazine hit the newsstands. Well, Monocle's editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck, is still in Jakarta, and he joins me down the line from there now. Andrew, I'm guessing it's around lunchtime there. Have you yet recovered from what I'm sure was a very big night last night?
Well, it was a bit of an epic night, and you catch us in a very traditional restaurant. One of our team members, Jess, is Indonesian from Bali. Her mum's in town, so it's amazingly taken us to an amazing restaurant here where we're getting a full feast to kind of get over last night's energetic movements on the dance floor and a few celebratory drinks at the end of the day.
Well, tell me more about not just the celebratory drinks and the dance floor. I'm longing to know if Nick Monisse kept his shirt on, but the highlights and the takeaways from the actual conference part of the Chiefs.
Well, look, I think the first interesting thing is, it started with the question, why Jakarta? And I think even for many people from the region, people came here from Manila, for example, and they hadn't been to the city ever in their life, which is, it seems strange to us. But Jakarta has this reputation of being a bit tough to get around, maybe not the most inviting city for tourists. But they're trying to change that, and they're trying to make the city appealing to outsiders to come here. And we met amazing people across the day. So what's great is up on stage, you had entrepreneurs and business people from all across Asia coming here to tell their stories. And it was amazing. It was like we we started the day with a woman called Cynthia Wijono, and she talked about how she's started this market here that 100,000 people come to a craft market at weekend. We had Jaime Diaz, who runs Fully Booked, the biggest book chain, well, the most aggressively growing book chain in the Philippines. Again, explaining why people in the Philippines still read books and the challenges he faced. So it was, sorry, that's a scooter going fast. So it was a day about listening to all these stories. And at the end of it, I think that people were just amazed. They just didn't know what was happening in Indonesia, in business and around entrepreneurship.
Why are events like this important, particularly for Monocle and our supporters?
And as I said, to change people's perspectives. We're a global magazine, and we have to come good on that. We have to be out in the world. We can't only do events in our HQ markets. We have to come and see our readers. And again, you come here, there's a lot of people in Indonesia who love the brand, who know the magazine, who listen to the radio. And that's important to us, but also to change people's perspectives a little bit. There's nothing like going somewhere else and just seeing the world from a different perspective to make you think differently. So it was incredible being here and just having these stories play out.
Our new website is now up. It's very exciting. Tell us what's changed in our online presence.
Well, it's been a while coming. We haven't really upgraded the website for many years now, and we've been working on this for months. So the idea is, that we're definitely not moving away from print being primary for us in magazine stories or radio being important. But we do want to tell some of those stories that we do both on air and in the magazine in richer ways online as well. So we've upgraded the website, and it was a strange thing because it actually went live while we were actually at the conference. So we were talking about it going live, and one of our readers in the front row had just happened to check on his phone, and he turned his phone around, and I could see that we've gone live. So it's a very exciting moment for us. We will be building on this in a lot of ways in the coming months. We want to be a primary place where you go to for travel advice, from our editors and from our correspondents around the world. So we're building up a whole library of city guides that will only be available to our subscribers online. And we just want to do some fun things with digital that fit into our world.
And finally, Andrew, the new edition of the magazine is now out. What can we expect there?
Well, this is our design awards. And so unbelievably, Nick Manise, our design editor, is here. And he's at lunch, but he's flying via Bali, I believe, back to Paris. And we're doing a launch for the issue in Paris with an awards party. But this is his design awards. This is the issue that looks at the best makers, designers, furniture companies around the world. And it's always an exciting moment for us. So, yeah, I don't know, one thing after another has piled up this week. So it's been amazing watching the team back in London get all these things ready.
Andrew, before you go, I have to know, did Nick behave himself at the party?
He was the life and soul, let's just put it that way. He was definitely on that dance floor, and we saw plenty of him.
Right, the shirt, I get it. Say no more. Andrew Tuck in Jakarta, thank you very much indeed. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now it's time to talk culture with Sophie Monaghan-Coombs, who's Monocle's Associate Editor for Culture. Sophie, you're looking very sparkling this morning and full of life and energy. You've actually been travelling. You've been in Abu Dhabi, right?
Yes, I was in Abu Dhabi last week for the opening of TeamLab Phenomena, which is a Japanese museum and which is the latest addition to Abu Dhabi's cultural district, the Saadiyat Cultural District, which is an area where they're just building a whole host of kind of world-class museums. And this is the latest one to open. It sits alongside the Louvre, which opened there in 2017. And the next kind of most exciting one, in my opinion, is the Guggenheim, which will be at the end of this year, at the beginning of next.
So tell us about TeamLab Phenomena itself.
Well, it's quite a an interesting museum. I would say it's more like an experience. You go in, the building is this kind of wonderful, bright, white, gleaming, enormous building. And then when you go in, it's incredibly dark, and your eyes have to adjust to that darkness, which is kind of throughout the whole building. And then you're taken around all these different rooms, and they're interactive, immersive, digital artworks often. But I think what's really impressive is the scale of a lot of them. Most of them are interactive, and there's just all these kind of wild things happening. There's a whole dry area, there's a whole wet area where you have to take off your shoes, roll up your trousers, you're kind of knee deep, wading through pools at different points. It's really quite an experience.
And how does it differ from most immersive art experiences?
I think it is really the kind of technological kind of best of these kind of experiences. As I said, the scale is extraordinary, and I was with a group of journalists who are used to going to, things like this, and people were kind of blown away by lots of the different rooms. I think some of it is the fact that someone dreamed up this different room in the first place, and the Team Lab founder, Toshiyuki Inoko, is known as a sort of a maverick. But I think it's really the execution that's really impressive. One room is just full of these enormous soap suds, and you're kind of striding through them, and you have someone there whose sole job is to hold up this big board and make sure that visitors don't get completely kind of hit in the face with these like floating soap. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's a sort of childlike dream that someone's decided that they actually want to make into an experience. And yeah, I actually found it a very kind of joyful time.
Now, Andrew's just been talking to us about the magazine. It is, of course, the Design Awards edition, but there's a substantial cultural section which you commission and edit. And the lead story within that in this edition is all about Beirut. Tell us, why did you focus on Beirut, and who did you focus on?
Well, Beirut was once the kind of cultural gem of the Middle East, but in recent years that's not been the case at all. As you know, Lebanon was without a head of government from October 2022 until the beginning of this year. There's been lots of financial difficulties. In Beirut specifically, there was the port explosion in 2020, which was really devastating. And Lebanon has also been caught up in the current conflict in the Middle East, although there was a ceasefire in November between Israel and Hezbollah. Israel are once again bombing Beirut. So it's a kind of city that has been besieged by a host of different problems. But within that context, we decided to focus on 3 institutions that have somehow kept going: an art house cinema, a gallery, photography archive, and a theatre. And we really wanted to kind of celebrate their work and show their sort of perseverance and resilience. And it's a really wonderful story.
Yeah, it's the Metropolis Cinema, the Arab Image Foundation, and the Metro Al Medina Theatre. How have they managed to negotiate those challenges?
Well, I think they've all been very sort of flexible and agile in their own way. As you say, Metropolis is this art house cinema that has a global reputation. When they reopened in December, they had people like Kate Blanchett making public statements about the importance of the cinema and rallying support for it to reopen. They all, as institutions, have been experimenting with new ideas, new partnerships. Some of them have had to move location. But I think mostly it's down to the sort of visionary leaders who have this unshakable belief in the power of culture in really difficult times.
Absolutely. Sophie, thank you very much indeed. That's Sophie Monaghan-Coombs, who is our Associate Culture Editor. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks very much to our producers, Chris Chermak, Laura Kramer and Hassan Anderson, our researcher, Francesca Gilks, and our studio manager, Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance from Mariella Bevan and Hunter Wang. Now, I'm sure you were listening to what Andrew said earlier, but our new website has just launched. Do log on, have a browse around. Our fantastic archives are still there. You can access any of our previous programmes. It's bright, shiny and new, and a huge resource for would-be travellers too. More immediately after the headlines, there's more music on the way, and the briefing is live at midday in London. The Globalists will return at the same time on Monday, and I'll be with you tomorrow for Monocle on Saturday. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.